sweet smell of a new video. Ooh, welcome back, everybody, to another one. So yeah, dang, it's been a while, huh? I mean, I've been traveling, I've been busy, I've been depressed. Basically, all of the things that make it really hard to, make YouTube videos and get something done have been happening. So I apologize for the delay. That's why I posted the one video of me making a song on my loop machine, but of course that is a major deviation from the normal kind of thing that I do on this channel. But that's okay, I kind of want to deviate sometimes. I kind of want to do different things, and I needed something to get me back into it. I don't know if you have that thing that I have where if you haven't done something for a while, it's really hard to muster the energy back up to get back into it. But that's what posting that music video was for me. It was like a way to get the ball rolling. And I gotta be honest, I wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't feeling the momentum building, but obviously it worked to a certain extent because here we are, my fellow YouTubers. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for being patient. I also want to say I've been getting some more followers recently, or should I say subscribers, because we're on YouTube, which is really wonderful. Thank you so much to everybody who's been coming in. I think a lot of y'all came from Shannon Q and Paulogia. I don't know how to say his name. I think I've been saying Paulogia, but I think it's Paulogia. I heard somebody say that. Anyway, thank you to Shannon Q for the shout out, and I'm gonna play that right here actually so y'all can see what happened.
One of the downfalls of being in atheist YouTube is I no longer watch atheist YouTube.
Right.
It's a dump.
So yeah. I don't even know. I couldn't tell you.
I do, because there's so many, I love this person. His name is Chris Keaton. He only has 500 subscribers. His content is great. Really, 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 really good. And he covers a myriad of things. And he's super underrated, and his production value is great. And he puts a great deal of effort into his videos, and he covers a wide range of topics, and he does interfaith dialogue. So he'll have a dialogue. He's a series right now where him and a friend of his who is still a Christian, so he's an atheist and his friend is a Christian, both talk about their differing deconstructions from evangelism or evangelical faith, and how he moved towards progressive Christianity and he moved towards atheism, and the differences there and where they align. And I think that's super important in our cultural environment to see those types of dialogues. So if I was going to shout anybody out, it would be Chris Keaton. And I just put his name in the chat as well, because I love the work that he's doing on YouTube, and he has 500 subscribers, and that's criminal.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that just the nicest thing? Thank you. But really, thank you so much. That really made my heart happy when I heard that, and to be recognized in other places, and especially by people who I listen to on the regular, is really exciting. So thank you again, Shannon. And thank you, Paul, for hitting 10,000 subscribers so it could facilitate that moment. So anyway, welcome. You're very welcome here. I hope I live up to all your expectations, all the hype. I'm sure I won't, but anyway, I've got a video for you today, if you couldn't tell by the fact that I posted a video. And I don't know what I've titled this yet, but hopefully it's something quippy. Hopefully it's something that gets good, click to like ratio. Hopefully it's something that gets, the people's catches their eye and says, hey, I want to look at that. I want to watch this video. Hopefully I've gone through the process by this point. But basically, we're going to be going over 7 surprising ways that religious trauma can show up in your life. Now, I want to preface with saying that religious trauma is not how everybody decides to qualify their time spent in religion, or the thought patterns and beliefs and whatever else that they see in their lives that are left over from their time in religion. Religious trauma is a term that I have decided to use for myself because it feels super accurate. I'll put the definition up on the screen somewhere, but basically it feels accurate to my experience, and it also helps give it some weight to what I feel I have experienced. So I'm not just trying to throw around religious trauma willy-nilly, because I recognize that it's not always smart to throw words like trauma around as if they don't carry a lot of weight, because they do. And I also want to mention that maybe that qualifier is too much for one person, and I don't want to scare you away from watching the rest of this video because of that word. Religious trauma can be experienced in many ways, and all of the things I'm going to be talking about today are not necessarily a byproduct of religious trauma. They could just be a part of your experience. But for me, having found the phrase religious trauma and having looked into it some more was extremely validating for my experience and the way that I was feeling, and also helped me move into a place of healing that religious trauma and healing these patterns and beliefs that we're going to be talking about today. So it was super helpful for me, which is why I'm including it in this. But of course, I'm not trying to prescribe anybody or tell you that because you experience this thing, you also have religious trauma. That's not what we do here. What you define as trauma for you is between you and maybe your therapist or psychiatrist, people that you trust. It's not for me or anybody else to thrust upon you. So with that said, let's get into it. Number 1, it can show up in your relationships. I'm going to talk about all of these things from the context of my own life and my own experience. So instead of giving vague examples of what it could look like, I'm going to tell you what I have experienced, and hopefully that makes it a little more concrete, but it also might then not be exactly what you have experienced. But I am hoping that it will be adjacent enough you will recognize it in what I'm saying, and then be able to take that information and help yourself in some way. I also feel that it's important to say that a lot of these beliefs are not really conscious or overt. They're much more subtle than that. They kind of play out through the subconscious, and it takes some personal reflection to be able to see, oh yeah, I see how this ties to that. So I just want to say that because some of this is going to sound like, I was making the choice to do this, to act this way in my life. When in reality, it was sort of like autopilot, the programming was just playing out without me realizing it until I had the shift in perspective to realize it about myself. And once you have that, you're able to question it, dive into it, decide what's working for me, what isn't working for me. But until then, it usually resides in this sort of shadowy place of the subconscious and kind of runs your life. Not to be too dramatic about it. So, like I said, number 1, relationships. I believed for a long time that my partner had to feel okay for me to feel okay. And remember, this is one of those moments where I say I believed, and it wasn't like a fucking belief that I wrote down on a paper. I believe that my partner needs to feel okay for me to feel alright. By golly, no. It was something that upon reflection I was able to see about myself, that I was constantly crossing my own boundaries and pushing myself too far to take care of the other person in the relationship. Whether it was platonic or otherwise, I would give too much of myself to make sure that other people around me were okay, so that I could finally feel all right. And I had this belief because I was taught that it was my responsibility to save everyone around me from going to hell. I've talked about this before on my channel, about how it's such an insidious and hurtful and bullshit belief, but there it is. I had that belief for a long time, and that was actually a belief, I need to save people from going to hell. It was something that I consciously thought, then turned into the subconscious pattern when I let go of the practical, obvious, conscious belief. So because of that, I have had some codependent tendencies with my partners and with my friends and with my family. I realized that I was subtly scanning for how everybody was feeling, and I was constantly worried about them not feeling okay, and if I felt like they weren't feeling okay, I was definitely kind of in the freak out zone. In trauma land, this can be called hypervigilance, which is a bitch to deal with because not only am I constantly scanning if everybody's okay, like I said, when I can tell that they're not okay, I would feel so uneasy and like I needed to do something. So I would take it upon myself to fix whatever that thing was, insert myself into the situation in a way that was not helpful to me or the person. Even if they didn't ask me to fix it, I would try to move in and be like, I'm gonna help take care of you and I'm gonna help you feel better so that I can feel okay. So you can see where that maybe is not so healthy. Number 2, perfectionism. Because I was taught that this life is like rags and is basically a 70 to 80 year trial run or warm up for real life, which is going to be eternity in heaven, which is perfect and amazing and free of all bad things and free of sin, I have a tendency in my life to believe that unless things are perfect, everything is wrong. Things are not okay. This has been a hard one for me. Not only does the perfectionism come out in like the things that I'm doing, like daily menial tasks or projects for school or whatever, it also came out in me feeling like my life was fucked up because it wasn't perfect. Who do you know whose life is perfect? Nobody. So the fact that I was using that as a measurement of how successful I was as a human was really fucking with my brain. And like I said, I still have a tendency for that to creep in. I know intellectually and can say consciously, like right now, like I know nobody's perfect and nothing's perfect in the world and blah blah blah, all the same niceties that I'm sure we've all heard. But it still comes through. And I'm not sitting here thinking like, no, this isn't perfect, what's wrong with me? Why can't I ever do anything perfectly? Like I said before, it's much more subtle than that. For the longest time, I just had the general sense of unease and dissatisfaction with everything. With my jobs, with my relationships, with my fucking life as a whole. I often have this sense that something is terribly wrong, or that something is going to go terribly wrong. And that somehow it's my fault because I've made all of the wrong choices. Because if I made all of the right choices, of course I wouldn't be feeling bad. I would feel happy and good and content and purposeful and perfect. So I can sit here and say all day, nothing's perfect, nobody's perfect. But until I was able to look at myself and address that underlying perfectionism, that underlying subtle belief that unless everything was good, I wasn't going to feel good, nothing was going to change. Number 3, complex trauma. This, much like the term religious trauma, is not something to just be thrown around willy-nilly. It's something that should be talked about with your therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist so that trained professionals can help you with a diagnosis if that's something you need and help with the management of it. I will straight up say that I have not been diagnosed with this, but it is something that resonates with my experience and also helps give me some language to contextualize my experience. So while I recognize I may not actually have CPTSD, it's helping me explore new ways of growing and healing. And I'm going to do exactly what I was saying y'all should do, which is talk to my therapist about it and talk to my psychiatrist and what measures do we need to take to help this? I'll put up this definition as well, but I also want to read it here because it has some important information. In the early 1990s, after scanning years of literature on trauma survivors, Judith Herman, a psychiatrist at Harvard University, proposed complex PTSD as a new diagnosis, distinct from PTSD, to account for a cluster of symptoms that resulted from long-term exposure to extreme stress. These problems, Herman noted, occurred when one person was under the control of another, such as in the context of prisons or labor camps, or in certain families. They included difficulties with emotion regulation, unstable personal relationships, pathological changes in identity and self-image, and self-destructive behavior. Now, while I'm not going to get into some of the more personal details of this because that's maybe a little too much for a YouTube video, I did spend my entire childhood believing that God was watching my every fucking move. There was no escape from his gaze, from him watching you and judging you and being with you and judging you. And I was taught that if I ever did anything wrong, of course he would know about it, and eventually, if I didn't fess up to my crimes, he would let my parents know about it. So this was my way of being taught that it's better to take responsibility for my actions than to wait for people to discover it on their own. And while I think it's a good lesson to teach kids to take responsibility for their actions, I think it's horrific to teach them that they have no privacy, and that's why they should take responsibility. And that's how I learned to relate in many ways. I would constantly overshare about myself, believing that people already knew shit about me, so I might as well go ahead and tell them because even if they didn't know, they were gonna find out in the end anyway. So I might as well be honest because honesty is the best policy. I was even terrified of people knowing something about me that I didn't know about myself, that I would somehow find out how horrible of a person I was or how toxic of a person I was from other people, and that everybody was talking about it behind my back, and then suddenly I would find out that years have gone by of me being a horrible person and everybody knew except for me. I was convinced that any hint of rejection from anybody meant that I had done something wrong and that they were mad at me, even if it had nothing to do with me actually. These were just the stories that I was telling myself. I couldn't escape the eyes of God, so when I got rid of God, I could no longer escape the eyes of people. And that led to me letting other people define who I was. I thought other people just automatically knew better than me. I had no trust in my own intelligence or my own sovereignty. So if somebody told me something about myself, I thought it must be true. I never built my own foundation of self-trust, of self-assuredness, and self-reliance. I had to get other people's judgments and opinions on something before making a choice, or feeling like I could make the right choice or a choice that was good for me. I didn't know how to consider how I really felt. Even if I did know how to consider it, I also didn't know how to trust what I felt. And this translated to everything in my life. And when I say everything, I do mean everything. Even now, it can be hard for me to garner the energy needed to make daily decisions, let alone big life decisions. And that was the thing that really started to eat away at me, was not being able to make decisions about my future. So number 3 is not being able to futurecast. I never felt like I was equipped personally to follow my own dreams and desires and goals. I was taught that the most important thing in life was to follow God and His plan for your life. His plan, not my plan. So the easiest option was to not have a plan, to not have goals, dreams, and desires. I spent pretty much all of my time trying to be the best servant to God that I could be. So almost no time was given to me figuring out who I was and who I wanted to be outside of the context of a God. So when I finally shed the burden of a God, it was now up to me to decide what to do with the rest of my life. Only to realize I had no fucking clue how to do any of that. I spent almost no time, if not no time in my childhood, developing my own vision of the world and who I wanted to be in it. All I ever wanted to be was the best Christian, and now suddenly I was presented with deciding what school to go to, what career path I wanted to enter, and what to do with the rest of my life. I was not ready for any of this. So I made choices as they came to me. I took no initiative and was not proactive about going after what I wanted, because I didn't want anything. Nothing was good enough, nothing was inspiring. So I just let life happen, and when decisions needed to be made, I would make them, but from the place of like, well, this has to happen, so there we go. I always wondered how people could possibly know what they wanted to do, who they wanted to be, what career they wanted to be in, or even something as personal as like, what relationship should I be in? Every choice I could have possibly made would have led to so many unknowns, and the effect that they were going to have on my life were too great and too vast for me to be able to feel confident making a decision. So I froze. I was constantly waiting for something more obvious to come along, something that would snatch me up from my confused, lost state and be so inspiring as to light the way forward for me to follow its light with certainty down that path. But the more I waited, the more depressed I got, and the more decisions I made from this place of freeze, the more unsettled I felt in life, and the more lost and confused I became. Having God in the past gave me a clear path forward always, or at least what I felt like was a clear path forward. I could easily have stayed close to the Bible and let it carry me into my old age without so much as hearing a whisper from the God I believed in. It wasn't until much later that I realized that people just make choices. People just wanted things naturally. People just committed to paths forward without certainty. It took me years to not be mad at that, actually. And it also took me years to get over my fear of decision making and future casting. And I say get over, but it's another one of those things that is so insidious and so deep that it continues to show up to today. But I have more tools now to deal with it when it does show up. And I got those tools from therapy, coaching, medication. And now, after years of doing all of that, I'm finally able to look into my future and decide for myself what I would like to do. I'm finally able to take a step forward on my own, be proactive, and take that initiative. And I'm no longer waiting for something inspiring to finally find me. Number 5, feeling unsettled in your career or your job. This is connected to the last point, but another way that it can affect you is making you feel burnt out in your job or career. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, or how happy you were when you started, you can get to this point where you just feel dissatisfied, where you just feel unsatisfied, dissatisfied. I'm not sure which one. You don't have satisfaction, and potentially you're like me, and again, you feel like you've made wrong decisions all the way up to this point. So you change jobs, trying to find that inspiration again, and what feels like the correct decision. I believed erroneously for years that once I felt better, I would have known that I made the right choice. So the entire time that I felt bad, which was most of the time, I was constantly questioning all my decisions, which would make me feel worse, and then the cycle would continue from there. It wasn't until I realized that I needed to start trusting my choices and recognizing that it's okay to make bad choices. Not like fucking murdering somebody, like, just making a choice to go into a job and then not being super happy there, so deciding to like change to something else. It wasn't until those shifts that I started to feel better. And again, like many of these, even that can be a struggle still. Number 6, feeling like there's a black and white, right and wrong. This one's pretty self-explanatory and maybe even a little obvious, but it is such a big one that shows up in so many ways. I was taught that there's a definite right and a definite wrong. So my purpose in life was to be right. And for the longest time, I also felt like I was right. I thought I had the correct religion, that I had the correct God, and I didn't have to question that. I was just correct. I was also taught that I was naturally already wrong. So I needed to strive to be right in the future for the rest of my life. Of course, what I learned from this and took away from this was that if I felt wrong in some way, then things probably were wrong. And what I mean by this is like, if I felt bad in some way, which was the wrong way to feel, then I had done something wrong, which made me feel horrible because I was always doing my best to do the right thing and make the right choice. The ways of the world were wrong, so I avoided the ways of the world. The ways of God were right, so I did my best to do what was right. However, this meant that I based my entire moral and decision-making systems off of the words of God, which I couldn't even verify if they were actually the words of God. I just believed that I was correct in thinking that they were. And I was left with my subjective experience of what right and wrong are, based on my understanding of God's words. But as a human, I believed I was a sinner, so my understanding was inherently flawed. So you can see where this all starts to break down, even when I had God. Unfortunately for me, I had not realized for quite some time how deeply rooted this black and white thinking was in my life. I was in a constant battle of trying to discover the right decisions and avoid the wrong ones, with no real roadmap as to how to make those decisions. So again, it was just easier to not make decisions until life thrust decisions upon me. And this was another huge contributing factor to me feeling like I was doing everything wrong. I was convinced that there was a right way and a wrong way to make all of my choices, like what career I should choose, what relationship I should be in, what university I should go to, and even where I should live. And I was also convinced that I would know the right choices based off of the feeling that they gave me. So when I continued to feel worse and worse, I was convinced even more that I was making all of the wrong choices. But I didn't know how to stop making the wrong choices because I couldn't tell why some choices were wrong and why maybe some were right. Nothing was working. It wasn't until I realized I had to be confident in my own choices and simply deal with the consequences, whether they were good, bad, or neutral, that I was finally able to relieve myself of some of the pressure of believing in right and wrong. Now I don't even think that that's an accurate way of looking at life at all. Saying that there's a right and a wrong choice implies that there's a best choice and a worst choice, which also implies that somehow somebody knows, usually a God, how those choices are going to affect the rest of your life, how they're going to play out in the infinite web of possibility. All of that is simply a recipe for disaster. You'll never feel like you've made the absolute best choice in life, because how could you be sure of something like that it was the absolute best choice that you could have made? So you'll drive yourself mad following this line of thinking, much like I did to myself. The best choice you can make in life is the one that you want to make. Not because someone or something else told you to, but because you are connected to your own desires and you want to actively participate in the unfolding of your life. You have to make choices knowing that you can't know or control the outcome, and be ready for whatever else may come so that you can make the next best choice for you. Number 7, shame and embarrassment. This one might also seem pretty obvious, but god damn it if it's not the biggest, or one of the biggest, and one of the most insidious, at least for me. The ways shame and embarrassment showed up in my life for the longest time were never-ending and felt all-encompassing. I didn't want to take action or have opinions on anything because I was afraid of what other people would think. I was always afraid of being publicly humiliated and embarrassed. I was so full of self-shaming tendencies already, I was filling in the blanks for other people. I would tell myself stories about what other people were thinking about me. And again, I wasn't I wasn't happily ruminating on these things. They were just like, it was just happening to me, is what it felt like anyway. Instead of believing that people liked me, I was constantly analyzing how I might have embarrassed myself or looked really stupid in some way. Because I was taught that I was a sinner from birth, I learned that it was inherently shameful to be a human, to be me. So I internalized it and I buried it deep down. I had constant bouts of anxiety and imposter syndrome because I believed that I was nobody. And I believed that I was not as well equipped as other people to handle whatever job it was in front of me. I never wanted to take on more responsibility or leadership roles because of the fear of mishandling them. I was too nervous to ask anybody out because I was already so disgusted with myself. I figured everyone else must be too, and so on and so forth. Shame and embarrassment still show up for me, and they're so hard to shake because of how foundational they are in the Bible and in Christianity. It was all okay to a certain extent when I was a Christian. I just chalked it up to persecution and felt self-righteous and victorious in my belief that I was going to end up in heaven and that I would never feel that way again. But that kept me complacent. I never tried to get better because I assumed it was just going to get better eventually. One day when I made it to heaven, probably. And once I lost the security of that framework, I was buried so deep in my own shame and embarrassment. It took me years to realize or even acknowledge that I needed help. So finally, my conclusion. We've covered just a few things here. This is by no means a complete list of things, but are some of the ones that have definitely affected me a lot and that I see still showing up in my life. So you may be asking yourself, holy shit, that was depressing. I see some of these things in my experience, and what can I do about them now? Well, for starters, if you do recognize any of these things in yourself, you can do so from a place of compassion. If you did recognize any of these telltale signs, or even thought of other ones as you're watching the video, please know that it's okay. It doesn't always feel okay, but that is also okay. You were taught these things from a young age, or you were in a place in your life where accepting any of the behaviors and thought patterns that led you to this point felt impactful and important at the time, so you chose to take them on. Whatever the reason, it's valid. Potentially infuriating, but valid nonetheless, because now you've realized maybe they're no longer serving you like they once did. But something important to remember is that as you begin to heal and grow and move on, these pieces still come up often because they're trying to protect you from something. Your nervous system learned to react in certain ways based on old scenarios that were most likely keeping you safe in some way at the time, and sometimes, according to your nervous system, even keeping you alive. Change is hard because of all the unknowns that come with change. Now, I'm no neuroscientist, so this is all rudimentary explanations for like what's going on in the brain and the nervous system. But our brains and our nervous systems like to learn patterns that work and continue using those on repeat to remain efficient and alive. Now, recognizing all of this with compassion does not mean that you're not allowed to be mad, or that you're not allowed to grieve in some way, or that you're not allowed to feel any kind of other emotions about it. I still grieve the youth that I feel I lost, being so heavily indoctrinated in evangelical Christianity. So I continue carrying that and learning from it and growing from it, and looking at that time in my life with compassion, and looking at that piece of myself when it comes up for me in my life now. Looking at those things with compassion doesn't mean that I'm not grieving, doesn't mean that I'm not pissed sometimes, doesn't mean that sometimes I wish it would have been different. So I still grieve, and I still get angry, and I still wish things would have been different sometimes, and I'm able to bring compassion in next to all of those things. It takes time to shift a lot of these patterns, and it's okay to take the time that you need. There is no correct timeline, and there's no such thing as doing it perfectly, and you may feel the pangs of shame and embarrassment come up as you move through these things, and you may believe at some point that you're doing it all wrong because you feel so bad sometimes. All of this is natural and normal and okay. I've gone through years of hiring coaches, learning trauma resolution techniques that work for me, got on medication, and go to therapy consistently now. And as much as I feel I've grown and healed from a lot of this, I still find new ways to grow and heal all the fucking time. And as scary and as hard and as painful as all of this can be, I'm finally able to say to myself things like, I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm going to move forward anyway. I don't know how this is going to affect my life or if I'm doing it correctly, and I'm going to take another step forward. I may feel embarrassed and ashamed and stupid sometimes, and I'm going to go for what I want anyway. Life may not always feel like it's in your control, and indeed much of life is not within your control. But you can learn how to roll with that. How to be you in a world that desperately needs people to be themselves. And how to work with thoughts and emotions that can sometimes feel like a barrage from something outside of you, so they no longer weigh you down and overwhelm you like they used to. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all of the new subscribers. Thank you to all of my patrons, and a special shout out to my newest patron, Keelan McCulley. Hopefully I said that right. Thank you so much for all of your support and for helping me make this content, because every view, every like, every dollar helps me make more of this. And if you'd like to see more of this, you can go to my Patreon, which is in the description below, as well as my other social medias. And I'm also going to leave a couple of links, like I have done in the past, for people who are looking for resources for life after religion. So things like the Secular Therapist Project, so you know that you're getting a secular therapist who's not going to potentially put some of their own dogma into their therapy session, and some other resources. So take a look there if that's something that you feel like you might need. I don't know if you heard that sneeze, but that was my partner. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I've got some other things in the pipeline, and I'm hoping that making this video is going to help me with that momentum that I was talking about in the beginning. So I want to get back on a regular schedule here, and yeah, I think that's everything. I don't know. It's been a while. Yeah, I guess that's it. See ya.